In Egypt on Monday, the day after President Obama announced Osama bin Laden was killed, out on the street, there's kind of a non-event. No demonstrations. Yes, the Muslim Brotherhood issued a statement. Yes, obviously people talked about the news. But that was it. It was a normal work day. Crazy traffic, a lot of smoking, everybody glued to their cell phones. And for all of us wondering, what does the death of Osama bin Laden mean for the Mideast? This was the reaction in the most influential, most populous Arab country in the world. A fourth of all Arabs live in Egypt. Our producer Nancy Updike went by Tahrir Square in the afternoon.
If anyone in Egypt wanted to mark Osama bin Laden's death publicly or spark a national conversation about it, Tahrir Square would be the place. But the only activity I saw there on the day of the announcement was a man taking a nap on the grass. In Cairo, the conversation is not about bin Laden. It's about something completely different. From the moment I got here, I was hearing the same thing over and over. I'd love to talk, but I'm on my way to a meeting. Or, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? These weren't work meetings. They're the meetings of 82 million people deciding what their country will be. If Egypt had a national sound right now, it would be the sound of chairs scraping into a circle. Or maybe the sound right after that. Arguing. This man is saying, why? He's one of about 15 people in a room forming a new political party. They're figuring out what the party stands for and how it should present itself right now in front of me, while other people are hammering a party banner onto pieces of wood for a rally. They've got a name for the party, the Egyptian Social Democratic Party. But what does that mean exactly? The man shouting, why, is responding to someone else who is saying, we're not liberals. We're not calling ourselves liberals. What's wrong with liberalism? The why man wants to know. Liberalism has a taint now, the other guy says. Some people are equating liberal parties with infidels. I have nothing against liberalism, he adds. I am a liberal. And wait, how are we different from other free market parties? Someone else asks. A man sitting behind the one desk in the room clarifies. We're somewhere between socialism and liberalism. Free market, but more like France or Germany than America. I spent the week going to meetings. They're happening everywhere. This one is 25 men sitting on plastic chairs in a circle out on the sidewalk, lecturing each other about politics. I went to another meeting on the AstroTurf deck of a boat on the Nile. 2 judges, 3 religious men, and a DJ, who I think qualifies for the title of Mr. Meeting. This is Gihad, a charming 6-foot-tall DJ, music producer, and party boy, who was apolitical and, he cheerfully admits, rather debauched under Mubarak's rule. He told an interpreter and me about sleeping till 5 p.m., going to parties all night. But then he saw friends die in front of him on Tahrir Square. And now he's quit being a DJ, he's living off his savings, and he goes to meetings all day. He starts ticking off his previous 24 hours. Noon prayer, followed by a neighborhood meeting about how to deal with crime, then on to a seminar about the pros and cons of a parliamentary republic versus a presidential republic, 8 p.m. dinner meeting with friends working on political issues, 11 p.m. meeting with other activists to nail down the agenda for a meeting the following day. Then at 2 a.m., a final meeting back in his neighborhood. 4 hours sleep, woke up, picked up a friend, drove here. My interpreter and I left Mr. Meeting, got off the elevator at the 6th floor of an office building and headed into a conference room for one last meeting that ended up being pretty mind-blowing. At first it looked like a classic corporate gab fest. Fluorescent lit room, about 30 people sitting around a huge oval conference table with croissants and breadsticks in front of them. But this was an assembly of 2 very different groups, longtime enemies, in fact, sitting face to face to see whether in the new Egypt they'll still be enemies. On one side was writers, journalists, editors, left-wing Egyptians actively working to keep Egypt secular. On the other side, current and former members of the Jamaat Islamiyah, an Egyptian Islamist organization that spent years murdering both foreign tourists and Egyptians. They went after policemen and politicians, including the president of Egypt. They were part of the plot that killed Anwar Sadat. The men sitting here have served decades in Egypt's prisons. The Jamaat Islamiyah also targeted Egyptian intellectuals, exactly the sort of people they're now sitting across from. The Jama'a Islamiyya started off the meeting the way they had to, by reiterating the fact that they publicly renounced violence 14 years ago, and they still renounce it today. "No one is forcing us to say this," said Nagah Ibrahim, a thin man with a long white beard, the Jama'a Islamiyya leader who spoke most often. He said, "Mubarak is gone, we can say what we want, and we're saying the same thing today we've been saying for years. No violence." After 15 minutes of back and forth about that, one of the journalists suddenly shifted the conversation with a quiet question. "What's your position on art?" For years, Islamic extremists have preached a sort of cultural anorexia. No poetry, music, dance. And in this meeting, once art came up, it took over the conversation. The secularists wanted to know, what art is okay in your view? Does painting have a place in Egypt? Sculpture? How about theater? Movies? Do you believe in such a thing as Islamic art and non-Islamic art? Would you ban any art if you could? The conversation went from chilly and polite to blunt. One of the secularists, a famous novelist, Yusuf El-Qaid, said, "We're not here so you can reassure us. We're here to find out what you really believe." For the next hour, the secularists and the men from the Jama'a Islamiyya have a surreal conversation, the kind that happens when people with profound differences do manage to speak civilly and honestly with each other. The two groups argued, quoted poetry, brought up specific Arab pop stars and their videos, and talked about the evolution of Islamic scholarship on the subject of whether it's okay to paint or sculpt a person. Short version, according to the head of Jama'a Islamiyya, first no, then yes, and now it's probably okay. Photography? Fine. Ballet? Not okay. No, there isn't Islamic literature and non-Islamic literature. Literature is literature. We like music. Well, some music. It can't be sexy. We used to sing ourselves and put on little plays when we were in prison to entertain ourselves. And we read. One of the Jama'a Islamiyya men said, "I really like the writing of Naguib Mahfouz. Since reading him, I don't read any other novels. I read all his books when I was in prison, and I related to them." This was an olive branch of sorts. Mahfouz is Egypt's most celebrated writer, proudly secular, who was stabbed in an assassination attempt by an Islamist militant after Jama'a Islamiyya put him on a hit list. Later in the meeting, one of the Jama'a leaders, Nagah Ibrahim, said, "Look, we may differ with you about art, but Jama'a Islamiyya will not burn art, will not destroy, will not ban. I could disagree with you about literature, art, or politics. That doesn't mean I would be violent against you or attack you. No, we fight thought with thought." Maybe promising not to stab someone seems a little too basic to be a bragging point. But in this conversation, it was part of a bigger statement by the Jama'a Islamiyya. We want to be part of the real Egypt, not a fantasy that we try to create by killing people. The Jama'a Islamiyya is in this meeting because it was the first violent Islamist group to not only renounce violence, but also publicly apologize and say what they did was wrong. Their leadership then spent years writing a detailed, multi-volume refutation of their former beliefs, including a direct challenge to Al-Qaeda's argument that America is a nation of infidels who deserve to be killed. Jama'a Islamiyya said, "No, that's not true." And they quoted the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, guaranteeing freedom of religion, in their rebuttal. All of which brings me to Osama bin Laden. Egyptian thinkers provided the inspiration for Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's modern ideological underpinnings are mostly from Egyptian Islamist writers, especially Sayyid Qutb. Bin Laden's second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is Egyptian, and he started reading Qutb as a teenager. One of bin Laden's professors at university was Qutb's brother. The modern phenomenon of violent political Islam has its roots in Egypt, and in terms of ideology and some key members, so does Al-Qaeda. But what does that mean for Egypt today? I had a guess, and I ran it by the leader of Jama'a Islamiyya, Sheikh Karam Zudi, the day after the meeting at his home. It seems to me that Ayman Zawahiri and bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, they're following ideas that came from Egypt 50 years ago, and Egypt itself has moved on.
خلاص وهم ظلوا متمسكين. هذا صحيح فعلا.
I think you're absolutely right. These are the ideas of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Egypt has overcome that, has gone through other phases. Like I said, the youth on Tahrir, they brought down a whole regime just with the strength of the word and maybe a stone.
Do you ever worry that it could come back in Egypt, violence in the name of Islam?
أشعر أنها لن تعود إن شاء الله.
I feel it won't come back, God willing.
Egyptians right now are in love with Egypt. Egypt is what they want to talk about, not bin Laden. And that includes groups like the Gamma Islamiyya that used to have a similar ideology. The Gamma Islamiyya leaders are doing the same thing other Egyptians are doing, sitting down at tables with croissants and breadsticks and talking about the future of their country.
Nancy Updike in Cairo.